You're listening to the Chapter a Day Bible Study. I'm John Stange, and today we're in Genesis chapter 13, Abram and Lot separate. Genesis 13 feels like a deep breath after the tension of Genesis 12. Abram and his family return from Egypt with more possessions and more people, and a renewed awareness of God's protection. But the chapter doesn't simply tell us that Abram came back home. It shows us what kind of man he was becoming, and it gives us a quiet glimpse of the heart of Jesus through Abram's humility and generosity and trust. When the chapter opens, Abram goes back to the place where he'd first built an altar between Bethel and Ai. Verse 4 says, "And there Abram called upon the name of the Lord." That detail matters because it shows us that Abram didn't want distance between himself and God. He'd made mistakes in Egypt. He'd leaned on fear, and he'd taken matters into his own hands. But now he's drawing close to the Lord again. It's the kind of moment we've all had where we pause and breathe and say, "Lord, I want to walk with you. I want to be led by you." And so here, Abram's returning to worship, and it sets the tone for everything else in the chapter. But soon we're told that Abram and Lot had a problem. They were both wealthy. Their flocks and herds had grown so large that the land couldn't support them while they lived side by side. And verse 7 says, "There was strife between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock." Family conflict can feel heavy, can't it? It doesn't take much for tension to seep in when resources feel tight or when people have different expectations. But watch how Abram responds. He doesn't fight. He doesn't demand. He doesn't insist that Lot, the younger man, defer to him. Instead, he chooses peace. And in verses 8 and 9, Abram says something incredibly generous. "Let there be no strife between you and me, for we are kinsmen. Is not the whole land before you? Separate yourself from me. If you take the left hand, then I'll go to the right. Or if you take the right hand, then I'll go to the left." Abram gives Lot the first choice, even though Abram is the elder, the leader, and the one who received God's promise. Abram's humility is striking here because he trusts that God will take care of him, so he doesn't need to cling to the best land or protect his own interests. That kind of trust always points our attention toward Jesus, who later said, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." Lot looks around and chooses the land that seems most attractive. Verse 10 tells us, "And Lot lifted up his eyes and saw that the Jordan Valley was well watered everywhere like the garden of the Lord." It was beautiful, green, and full of opportunity, but it also brought him near the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, places that were known for their wickedness. Lot's decision reminds us how easy it is to choose based on what looks good rather than what's spiritually wise. And he picks a land that promises comfort, not realizing it'll become a source of heartache later. After Lot departs, the Lord speaks to Abram again. God invites him to lift up his own eyes, and in verse 14 through 17 he says, "All the land that you see I will give to you and to your offspring forever. I will make your offspring as the dust of the earth." This moment feels tender because Abram gave up the right to choose. He chose peace and generosity and trust, and God responds by reaffirming his promise, expanding it, and encouraging Abram to see the immense future the Lord is preparing. We're meant to feel the weight of that kindness. God doesn't reward Abram because he's perfect. Abram certainly isn't flawless. But Abram's heart is pointed toward God. He wants peace. He wants unity. He wants to trust God more than he trusts his possessions or his own instincts. When he acted in fear in Egypt, he saw how things unraveled. So now he's choosing faith, and God is gently guiding him forward. The chapter ends with a simple and beautiful act of worship. Verse 18 says, "So Abram moved his tent and came and settled by the oaks of Mamre, which are at Hebron, and there he built an altar to the Lord." Abram's life is becoming marked by altars. Every step of the journey is turned into a moment of worship. It's as if Abram is saying, Lord, this story isn't about my strength, it's about your faithfulness. When we slow down and notice how Abram builds these altars, we actually see a picture of the Christian life, because every new place becomes a chance to remember grace. Every transition in life becomes a chance to say, Lord, I'm yours. I think Genesis 13 points us toward Jesus in quiet but powerful ways, because Abram's humility foreshadows the humility of Christ. Christ who didn't cling to his rights but laid them aside for our redemption. Abram's desire for peace reminds us of Jesus' call to love others, even when it costs us. Abram's trust in God's promises mirrors the way Jesus lived in complete surrender to the Father's will. And the land promise God reaffirms in this chapter ultimately finds its fulfillment in Christ, the true offspring of Abraham, who secures an everlasting kingdom for his people. As you think about this chapter, maybe it's worth asking yourself a few simple questions. Where is God inviting you to return to a place of worship, like Abram did near Bethel? Where might he be calling you to pursue peace instead of winning a conflict? Where is he nudging you to trust him rather than grasp for control? And what altars could you build in your own life, not literal ones, but moments, so markers, when you pause and remember that the story you're living is held firmly in God's hands? Genesis 13 is a relatively quiet chapter in the book, but it carries a deep invitation. Walk with God, trust his promises, and let him shape your heart to look more like Jesus. Thanks again for listening to today's episode of the Chapter a Day Bible Study. For more resources to help you in your walk with Christ and your understanding of the Bible, please visit my website at BibleStudyHeadquarters.com. And if you'd like to partner with me by becoming a supporter of this ministry, you'll see a few options to do so, again, at BibleStudyHeadquarters.com or in the description of this episode. As always, thank you for your prayers, thank you for your support, and thank you for your willingness to share this content with others. Have a great day, and I'll see you again right here tomorrow.